นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนะมัสสามิ Blessings. Somebody was asking me today about the benefits of being a Buddhist monk and living the life of a Buddhist monk. And there's many different ways you could answer that question, I'd say. But one thing that came to mind is that over time you have more of appreciation through the practice of what we call Dharma and Vinaya, the teachings pointing to the truth, and then Vinaya is the monastic discipline. Practicing that, studying, practicing that over many years, you have more of an appreciation of the Buddha's great gift to the world, the teachings that he gave. We actually say that the highest or greatest gift anyone can give is the gift of Dhamma. It defeats all other kinds of gifts that people can give each other. Not that other kinds of gifts are no good or not valuable, but the gift of Dhamma is the most valuable. And of course, the more you practice and study and then practice the Dhamma, perhaps the more you value that gift that you've received from the Buddha, the teachings that are both in the texts, so the Tripitaka, the suttas, and the Vinaya, the Abhidhamma, but then also contained in the monastic tradition as well, so the Vinaya, and then the practice that we do. Over time you appreciate more and more what the Buddha gave to the world, how valuable it is. When we start practicing, we have lots of doubts because naturally we're new. Even if you've been born into a Buddhist family or you've called yourself a Buddhist for many years, if you've never really taken the teachings on very much, studied them, or practiced meditation, there may be a point in your life where you say, well, now I'm going to start learning meditation, or now I'm going to start listening to Dhamma teachings, maybe now I'm going to keep precepts. You may be able to say there was a certain point in your life where you started to do that. But at the beginning you'll have doubts because you're new to the practice. And you may have some basic confidence and willingness to follow the Buddhist path and follow the teachings. But you don't know because you're new. But if you've been practicing for a long time, of course, you probably will have learned many things. Not always easy lessons. Many of our lessons we learn through the practice, lessons of suffering, finding out about suffering, how it arises, but then how to end it as well. But gradually, say from my experience, you come to appreciate everything the Buddha taught is coming from a mind of peace and stillness and purity, and then wisdom, true understanding, and true compassion, said for the benefit of others. And the depth of that is sort of infinite, you could say, in that the pure, undefiled or enlightened mind or fully awakened mind, there's just, ultimately there's no words to describe it. It can't be put down on paper. You can only sort of do justice to it saying a few sort of things, what we call Nibbana, the deathless, the unconditioned, the unborn, the uncreated, and so on. We can tell you what it's not suffering. We can tell you that it's the highest happiness. We can give these sort of vague things, but you can't really describe it or put it all down in detail on paper. It's something that's beyond words and has to be known or reached through practice. So it's only through the practice that one's doubts and lack of knowledge will disappear. Sometimes we don't understand that and we try to fill the vacuum through just endless studying and reading and asking questions. And I was much the same when I began. I used to ask questions, read a lot. But you come to a point where you realize that can help you, of course, but it's still very limited. You have to be willing to put your time and effort into actually training, particularly training the mind, and training body, speech and mind in the Noble Eightfold Path in order to prove that it works, or even that it doesn't work. You can't say it doesn't work if you haven't actually practiced it. But as you do that, you appreciate more and more the Buddha and his sacrifices, and then his amazing contribution, you could say, to human history, or to just relieving beings of suffering, and not just humans. We talk about beings in other realms as well. You're really incomparable. We say the goodness of the Buddha is incomparable. Sometimes people ask, well, what do you do as a Buddhist? What are you doing? And one of the answers is say we're doing good, which is pretty vague again. But they call the realization of Nibbana the highest goodness. So doing good is not simply helping your neighbour in some way, helping them push their car when their battery's flat or something. That is doing good, and it can be a very useful thing, kind thing. But the highest good means purifying the mind of greed, anger and delusion in the description of the Buddha. And because he had done that, he could say it. And then because we have what we call savakas, Sangha, who have practiced and also realized the Four Noble Truths, realized the end of suffering, purified their mind from greed, anger and delusion. There are those who have done it. They can also say, yeah, it's true, it works, it's proven. This is the highest goodness. So if you're telling your friend what the Buddhists do, and you answer, oh, they're doing good, or trying to do good, it goes all the way from helping your neighbour in some situation maybe, right up to completely freeing your mind from suffering. And that includes freeing your mind from the round of rebirth, which is often a controversial thing, because again, when you're new to the practice, you probably doubt, is there such a thing as rebirth, karma? But it's quite a useful way of talking about the practice. You're doing good, you're aiming to do good, to bring up the good qualities in your heart, and good or skillful actions, good skillful speech, and then actually going right to the mind and training the mind in goodness to the highest level. Not just a few kind thoughts, although it may start there, but actually continuous and powerful, you might say, goodness. Something tangible that you really know and get to know very well, get familiar with. You might say that's one of your goals as you're practicing the Buddhist path, is to become familiar with what is goodness in the heart and how to bring it up when it disappears, because one of the reasons we suffer is because the goodness, the good qualities in our heart disappear. They're not there all the time in the unenlightened, unawakened mind. They're there sometimes, and they're available to be developed, of course, but then sometimes we forget. Just as like now when we're meditating, with all the best intention of the world to be mindful and know the breath going in, breath going out, which is a form of goodness, because it will bring you the qualities of mindfulness, insight, and many other good qualities. But you can't do it all the time, can you? Your mind slips away to a thought, a distraction, or becomes sleepy or dull maybe. Your goodness slips away very easily sometimes. And sometimes without any kind of pressure from outside. It's not that anyone is giving you a hard time. It's not, you're sitting there meditating. It's not someone is standing next to you bullying you or giving you trouble, I hope. It's just your mind itself doing it. Slips away from goodness and maybe just goes into dullness or what we call endless proliferation, thinking about this, remembering that. And it kind of goes downhill. Ajahn Chah always used to say the mind untrained goes downhill all the time, like water going downhill. It always goes to the lowest point, meaning to the more unskillful, negative kinds of emotions and thoughts, away from goodness to the opposite, badness, I guess you could say. The untrained mind is not a happy mind. And if your mind is not happy, well, that will be reflected in your speech, your behavior, your actions, your decision making. So often we talk about goodness as in terms of wholesome mental states or skillful mental states that we're aiming to develop in the practice. And they have the effect to uplift us. Goodness on all levels is uplifting. Whereas when we forget the goodness in the heart and we're not developing, or the opposite, the more negative emotions take over, that deflates us, makes the heart feel heavier, under pressure. I'm just describing, the characteristics of a mind that is not particularly happy or wholesome or at ease. One way is it's like it's under pressure or like got a heavy weight pressing down. When you're sad or angry or discontent, there's something you want and you haven't got it and you keep thinking about it, whatever. It's like there's this heavy weight pressing down on you. You're not at ease in yourself, and that's reflected physically as well. So, our mental state will reflect in how we feel in the body, and even can be a cause for illness, physical illness. And it's obviously affecting the mind and the way we think, the way we feel, our outlook, our attitudes. When the mind does go downhill and we forget our goodness, we suffer, we're unhappy. Whereas when we make the effort to bring the mind out through the practice, we feel lighter, happier, better, you might say. And that's something it doesn't take long to prove. I mean, for me, when I was a layperson meditating, I started to get that point. That's how I was taught meditation, to observe the difference between what we call, the technical term is akusala dhamma or unwholesome dhammas, and then kusala dhamma, wholesome, skillful dhammas. And dhammas means your thoughts, your mental states, your intentions. I was taught to observe the difference mentally, what they do to you, and physically, what they do to you. So as a layperson, I sort of was working that out. When I think an angry thought, when I get sad, when I don't get what I want and I feel sad or annoyed, I'm suffering. And one of the things that brought me to become a monk, as I was explaining earlier today, is that I really realized that happiness and suffering is on us, each one of us. Even though other people are involved and our past is involved and all kinds of other factors and conditions are involved, really it's down to us, what we do and what happens to our mind. And because our mind is, we say, unenlightened, it's untrained, undeveloped, it's quite hard to keep goodness there. We love to think of more negative things, or think of things in a more negative light. And that doesn't mean to say Buddhism is teaching us to just kind of be dull or bland and not consider anything. But the Buddha was really concerned for our welfare and happiness, and so he noted, if you're not careful, you're not observing your mind, you're not mindful, just for want of a better word, your mind will just start going into negativity quite quickly and quite easily. It'll lose its goodness, and with that, suffering arises. And as you meditate, or even when you're not meditating, just going through your daily life, you can observe this at work, can't you? You react to things. Sometimes you're aware of your reactions. Half the time we're not even aware of the reactions we have in our mind, because one of the problems is that we're distracted. We've lost our mindfulness, our awareness, our understanding in different situations, and then we fall into different moods, mental proliferation, and sooner or later some kind of stress, suffering, unhappiness, or feel ill at ease. This is the water going downhill. It happens so easily. Just as you'll have noticed in your meditation, it happens. Well, that's actually going on all the time. It's just we don't notice. So we often say ignorance is bliss, and sort of, while you're not thinking about this or trying to train your mind, and it can seem easy, I just do what I want, think what I want. As long as generally things are going your way, it's okay. But I think if we're honest, a lot of the time things are not going our way and we're getting upset about it, we're getting unhappy about it. That's why we practice, to try and bring the mind up, to come up above the suffering of the world. Another thing that we're talking about today, someone was saying, why do we suffer so much over the words of other people, what they say and think about us, and then what they say about us? Probably the main thing is we tend to want or expect people to speak nice things about us. That's what everyone wants, isn't it? We like people to like us, praise us, appreciate us, say good things, nice things, friendly things about us. That's our kind of default way of looking at life. But it doesn't happen, does it? Some people might say nice things about you some of the time, and then often people will say totally untrue, unfair things, or sometimes true things, but said in a cruel way or a nasty way. People will often not give us what we want, and so we suffer. But the actual root cause is we're attaching to an idea, aren't we, that everyone should speak in a way that suits us, fits with our worldview, gives us a good feeling, makes us happy, says things that we agree with, and so on. But it's impossible because everyone is different. And even two friends will have differences on some things. Two people who live together, work together, will have differences. And then, of course, strangers in the world, well, some of them will some of the time think like you, and some of the time they won't. That's karma. And karma separates people and differentiates between people. And you have to realize that, so that you don't always suffer even when people are saying unkind things about you. And sometimes those are lessons, or maybe there's something we need to adjust in our behavior. It's not all bad or all untrue or useless, but we also have to catch this view that, people should speak nicely about me, and catch it, because you're never going to get it totally satisfied. There'll always be someone who doesn't like you or doesn't agree with you or says something that doesn't agree with you. That's life. And the important thing is to look after your mind as you're facing that. And often it happens out of the blue as well. You can't always control when bad news will come your way or criticism will come your way, negativity. So it's another practice of mindfulness. Just like you have to be mindful of every in breath and out breath, you have to be mindful of your reactions to the words of other people and catch your view. If your view is everyone should say nice things, you have to catch that and say, okay, that is good. It's not, it's not absolutely wrong, but it's not going to happen all the time, isn't it? So when it does happen that someone is rude to you, insults you, criticizes you, says something unfair, unkind, you're ready. And you don't immediately let it take away your goodness. Because that's what happens again, doesn't it? Our goodness slips away, sometimes internally because we remember things or get caught in a train of thought that's very negative. We've lost our mindfulness. And then sometimes it's our reaction to what's going on around us, such as the words of other people. And it's endless, isn't it? Sometimes you just imagine, because our imagination is so untrained and so active, you put words in other people's mouth before they've even said something. Maybe they said something before, they told you off, or they criticized you or rude to you last week. Okay, it happened. But then next time you meet them, already you're imagining it, aren't you? Oh, I bet they're thinking bad about me, they're going to say something bad. It's already happening in your mind before anything has actually happened. And maybe that person has forgotten all about it or moved on. Maybe not, but maybe they have. And there's nothing coming from them, but you're already filling in the space with your imagination. And sometimes that can go on for a long time, weeks, months, years. And so, once you picked on a person, if it is, just for this example, a person, say at work or in your family or something, then you can have a sort of toxic relationship for weeks and months and years, but much of the time it's just your mind filling in gaps and spaces where maybe it's not worthy of that. Maybe they haven't said as much as you think they've said, or they're not thinking in the way you think they're thinking. But that's what our imagination likes to do. Think the worst, then get in a mood. And that's all going on internally, isn't it? And when you meditate, you'll notice that, the internal chatter, and how often we're creating stuff, imagining things, imagining the worst. Even if something bad has happened, you'll notice how much extra badness there is because you're adding on in your own mind, holding on, fixating on it, and so on. As you practice more mindfulness and follow the Buddhist teachings, try to put effort into keeping sila, developing generosity and kindness in daily life, mindfulness, and then the reflective power of the mind, then you might notice what's going on more, see it more clearly, and then you have to start taking responsibility for your own mind. In the end, that's the only person who can do this, the only person who can pick out these more negative thoughts, reactions, recondition the mind is us. With the best teachers in the world, even with the Buddha present, if we were fortunate enough to be living with the Buddha or meeting the Buddha or any other enlightened teacher, they can't do it for us. We have to do it for ourselves. We can get blessings and we can ask for blessings from the gods or God or whoever it is that you like to ask blessings from, but they can only do so much. The real blessing is yourself, isn't it? Developing your own practice. Learning to develop this ability to look back at your own mind and what's going on and recognize where your goodness comes from and how to develop it more. And then when you've lost it, when it turns into badness that leads to stress, unhappiness, to recognize that. That you might say is the essence of the Buddhist path, is developing that kind of knowledge. And it can come up in so many ways. I mean, even the Buddha himself, we know his life story. Before he was enlightened, he didn't practice perfectly yet. He'd started off from a place of not knowing, and for him it was the hardest of all because he didn't have an enlightened teacher. He had to do it himself. He did have teachers who he went to, learned how to meditate, learned many things, and he appreciated that. But they also couldn't completely free his mind from greed, anger and delusion. So he had to go off on his own until he had done it for himself. So even the Buddha took wrong turns, had some wrong views to start with until he had recognized that. We know his first part of his life as a mendicant, living in the forest. He was practicing what we call Cultivating yoga, the ascetic practices, sometimes self-harm or self-punishment even, where he took on many very extreme ascetic practices which were fashionable in those days to try and really train the mind to abandon all attachments to the world, and particularly through the body, the attachment to the body. So fasting to the point where he reduced the amount of food to just eating 1 grain of rice a day, going without sleep, holding his breath, staying in one posture without moving, standing, sitting, walking, to the point where he's just kind of almost unconscious probably, pushing himself physically and mentally to the limits of human endurance, and you might say doing that well, but with the wrong understanding, pursuing it with the wrong understanding, those kind of practices, until he finally realized this is not going to free the mind from the craving and attachment, which he sort of started to realize is the cause of suffering. So he gave that up. But he didn't go back to indulgence, like he said. As a layperson, I indulged. Before he was a monk, he had every nice thing that was on offer in India in those days, good food, good clothes, nice home, friends, all the pleasures, the music, the entertainments, everything that was available in those days, he had that. So he knew how to indulge as well, what we call kama sukhalikana yoga, the way of sensual indulgence. He knew that's not going to lead to ultimate happiness or liberation or purity of mind. He knew that because he'd already been there, and most of us have, because most people in the world are pursuing that kind of existence where we think the more pleasures we have, the happier we'll be. Without realizing it actually stimulates a lot of discontent. He'd been there, and then he tried the other way, Atthakila yoga, where he's pushing the body to extremes, fasting, going without sleep, and so on. So he came to a conclusion neither extreme works, and so he was looking or found the middle way, what we now call Majjhima Patipata, the Noble Eightfold Path. But that wasn't a way of indulgence, although his friends at first thought that. The other monks with him, who were still very extreme in their behavior, in their ascetic practice, thought, oh, now Gautama, the Buddha, or Siddhartha is just becoming indulgent. But he was just stepping back from one extreme, eating a bit more, resting a bit more, practicing in all postures, but not to the point of indulgence, but just enough to give him the strength so he could meditate and his mind would settle down and he wasn't stuck in a view, because any view we develop, it can become an obstacle in the practice if you hold on to it too tightly. So he came back to that, and then on the night of his enlightenment, we know he worked out that the real cause of human suffering is this identification and attachment to craving, greed, anger and delusion that comes up in the mind, the bad stuff in the mind, and that we need to preserve the good stuff, the mindfulness, the patience, and then the wisdom, the investigation, putting effort into that until all craving and attachment is seen as a cause of suffering. And if you know something is going to make you unhappy and suffer, you don't want it anymore, do you? You want to let it go. But you have to really thoroughly investigate that to see that. But early on, before he got enlightened, he had that understanding arise, which we now know as the sort of teaching on the lute, the 3-stringed lute. He had this image come up in his meditation of a lute with 3 strings. And one of the strings was too tight, pluck it, and sound is not right, it's not melodious, it's too taut, so it's like bing, out of tune, tight, unpleasant sound. One of the strings was too loose, blang. If you've ever played a guitar, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's too loose, not melodious, can't get a good sound out of it. And then the 3rd string plucked just right. nice tune, nice sound. The middle way, this is where he was working out that you push yourself too hard physically, it's counterproductive. Ultimately, it will become counterproductive. You're just sort of blindly attaching to a view, I've got to not eat or not sleep or just push myself, which in the end agitates the mind, doesn't bring the mind to serenity, ultimate serenity, or doesn't develop insight. Or the way of indulgence, the flat string, blang, where the mind is so flabby and flat that it just can't know anything or bring up good qualities because there's not enough effort and not enough subtlety and mindfulness in the mind. It's just like a flat string. So the perfectly tuned, perfectly adjusted string in the middle is the middle way, and you have to get to that through your practice. But the guidance is, you need to develop the wholesome, good qualities of mind and abandon the unwholesome, and then you get to this point where the mind is at ease within itself, and physically that's reflected. Generally, even if you've got illness, if your mind is at ease, you can cope with that illness better, and it has the mind that's at ease and peaceful will have a good effect on the body even when you're ill or tired. So the Buddha developed or had that nimitta, we call it an ukkaha nimitta. You have a strong image that maybe gives you some insight, or a reflection of an insight that he was developing, thinking about his practice. And then he used it throughout his teaching life as well. The three loop is such an excellent kind of simile of the way we are in our life or in our practice. We're either not trying hard enough or we're trying too hard, so we get overstressed and taught. The Buddha saw that such an excellent way of talking about the mind and our experience, because when it's too tight, your mind is not happy, not peaceful. When it's too loose, not peaceful. That's something you've got to observe in your own life, in your own practice. And probably on many occasions, the Buddha used this, like with Venerable Sona, one of the first enlightened disciples of the Buddha, when he's walking meditation all night long, which is a very good thing, putting effort to be mindful and putting effort to develop goodness of mind, you could say, but doing it just a little bit too much to the point where his feet were all bloody and cut because he's walking so much, and his mind hadn't quite settled down. So the Buddha gave him an adjustment, talking about the three strings on the lute, giving him an idea where he has to just get the effort, balance the effort so it's not too slack, not too tight, not too much. And many people will use this. It's just a reflection, isn't it? At the moment, am I trying too hard? And that you'll tend to notice it brings up a lot of negativity when you're trying too hard, maybe too much desire, wanting results, or pushing yourself physically to the point where your mind just can't settle down, and very distracted, anxious, not at ease. Or probably more common, but nevertheless a problem, is too little. Am I trying too little? I'm not getting up and doing my meditation. Or when I'm meditating, I'm not trying very hard, so I'm sitting there but my mind is all over the place. I'm not trying very hard to bring up wholesome, good dhammas, not trying to maintain the goodness of the mind. The mind is slipping away all the time into negativity, unhappiness. So we can use this reflection all the time to see the sort of quality of our effort and whether we're bringing up and preserving the goodness of the heart and developing it further as well. And we still have more to do in our practice. Or are we letting everything slip away? If we preserve our goodness, it's just like wealth, isn't it? Money, wealth. If you preserve it, well, you've got it. It's useful to you. If you don't preserve money and wealth, well, it slips away. People take it, or it just gets used up or disappears on you, then you're struggling. Well, goodness is the same in your heart. If you don't preserve it and put effort into preserving it, you can't have it, you can't use it. It goes away and then you're in poverty. You become poor in goodness and rich in suffering. Whereas somebody who has a lot of goodness is rich in goodness and they don't have much suffering. Poor in suffering. So Buddhism is really focusing us in on our own mind. In the external world is important, of course. We have to know how to navigate it and learn how to get on with other people and make a living and do all the things we do. But more important is the quality of mind as you're doing these things, and how well are you preserving and developing your goodness. Or are you letting things drift away or flow away like water, just flowing downhill, disappearing? And that's up to us. So out of compassion, that's what some of the things that Buddha was teaching in his life, only for our benefit. It may seem difficult at first, but you have to find some effort, time, effort, put it into the practice, and then hopefully one day you'll appreciate why the Buddha taught the way he did. Anyway, for now, maybe I'll just say this much, and we can afterwards can have a Q&A session.